Good evening. I'm John Bailey. This is People to Be Heard, the program where people with something to say have their say. And tonight, you've got Georganne Chapin, who is the executive director of
Intact
Intact
America.
America.
Hello,
And
John.
that's right. And she runs the organization. It's been intact since 2008 when you
Right.
started it. And she is here to talk about a sensitive subject, very adult in nature. And if you, and I just give everybody that what would you call it?
Well, we
Just
could call it a heads up.
a heads up, right,
Right.
exactly. And let's get right into this. And the topic is circumcision
Right.
of male babies, of course,
Right.
when they are first born. And your organization, first of all, you are lobbying for an end to the automatic circumcision of male babies,
Right.
correct?
That's right. We're advocating for that to end. Of course, the circumcision rate in the United States is coming down. It has decreased over the years. We'll talk a little bit
Yes,
about
right.
that. But still, as it stands, more than half of all baby boys born in the United States are circumcised in the first couple of days of their life in hospitals by doctors. And that amounts to about 1,100,000 times a year, and or about 50, somewhere around 55% of all babies born, and that is unique. There's nowhere else in the world where circumcision is a common medical procedure. I will say it's not automatic in the sense that it's done without asking the parents for consent or for the mother for consent, but it is certainly considered in many places to be the normal thing to do.
I see. Now, what attracted you to get concerned about this topic that nobody talks about, except here?
Except here. Thank you so much for having me on your program to talk about it. I really appreciate it. Over the years, as I grew up and became an adult, and in the 1970s, I was an anthropology student, and I started to hear about the horrors of female genital cutting, and it just kind of popped into my mind. Well, wait a minute, we do that to baby boys in the United States.
It was
And
an epiphany.
it was an epiphany, it really was. And then my son was born in 1980, and I didn't know, of course, whether he was going to be a boy or a girl, but I knew whether he was a boy or a girl. I was not going to agree to have anyone cut his genitals, or her genitals, of course. Female genital
Right.
mutilation is illegal in the U.S. And over the years, he grew up, and we didn't talk about it, because why would you be talking about your son's private parts or anybody's private parts? And then when he was 18, and I thought about it occasionally. I told my cousins, don't circumcise your baby. It hurts. Why would you do that? And I would say, they say, well, what do you know about it? I said, well, my son is not circumcised. He's fine. And everybody in Europe is fine. And everybody in South America is fine. And everybody was fine before we started doing this. And when he was 18, he thanked me. And it just rocked my world.
Why?
I had come upon a discussion at a family gathering. I walked in the room, and everybody was hooping and hollering and yelling, men in the living room. And my son was standing there, and he was saying, I had no idea what they were talking about. I walked in, and he had his arms up in the air. He was saying, you guys just don't know what you're missing.
Oh, I see.
As we left at the end of the weekend, I said to him, wow, what was that about? I had an idea, but he said, oh, about circumcision. He said, and he looked at me and he said, Mom, I never thanked you and Dad for not letting them circumcise me, but I want to thank you. And at that moment, my whole awareness changed, because I had always thought of circumcision as something that was a brief, painful and unnecessary, but brief thing that was done to a baby.
Like clipping the umbilical cord.
Something.
something like that.
And I thought it was
A routine.
I thought it was unnecessary, and I didn't think it was the right thing to do. But at that moment, I realized it had lifelong implications. That here was my 18-year-old son saying that he was very grateful to have the body he was born with, and it changed my entire outlook. And after that point, I went to law school as a midlife healthcare executive. I went to the PACE right here in White Plains, evening program, and everything I studied: constitutional law, immigration law, refugee law, health law, bioethics, everything pointed me toward this as a very significant American problem. And so that's how I got involved.
I see. When you told your doctor or whoever was delivering your son that we're not going to do that, what was the reaction?
I actually had what I have come to realize was an unusual experience.
I see.
Nobody blinked. Nobody said a thing. It was fine. I've talked since then to hundreds of thousands of women, probably thousands of women and fathers, women and men, who were coerced, who were belittled, who really had to take a very serious stand against it. I was lucky. I was not. My son was born in New York City Hospital. His pediatricians were never made a comment about it, which of course they shouldn't, but I've heard how unusual my experience and his experience was. We just took him home and treated him like a normal, natural child, which he was.
Do parents to be today experience negativity from their physicians when they say they do not want their baby boy circumcised?
It varies enormously.
It does.
It varies around the country. It varies among hospitals. It varies among doctors. I've heard, as recently as 3 days ago, a story of a mother in the Philadelphia area who gave birth to a son after having 2 daughters, and she hadn't really thought about it. And as the obstetrician placed her newborn son on her stomach in the delivery room, he said to her, "You're going to have him circumcised, right? It's better." And she had never given it any thought. And that same doctor woke her up at 7 the next morning with a consent form for her to sign. So she got the hard sell. Many
Did she sign it?
people, she did, and has regretted it ever since. Many people tell me that their doctors are relieved when they say, "I don't want to circumcise my son." So it really varies tremendously. And most important, there's a lot of evidence that circumcision hurts and harms babies. And there is absolutely no evidence that leaving your child in his natural condition that nature created or God created or however you envision has ever caused anybody any harm.
What is the evidence that it harms babies?
Well, I would challenge people who ask that question to ask themselves if they would ask that question if I said I was going to cut off the first joint of every baby's finger. It seems to me that it speaks for itself, that if you are amputating a natural body part, it's painful.
You're saying sort of that God made a mistake.
Yeah. And that you're saying that
God doesn't make mistakes.
and you're saying it's your right to modify somebody else's body. I don't think we have, I don't think the proof should be on me or us to show that cutting off a normal part of your child's penis is harmful. I think the proof should be on the other side that somehow this is an okay thing to do. And we just know it's not. It violates bioethics. It violates nature. And it's something that everybody should have the autonomy to decide for him or herself.
It should not be
the future
said, "Oh, everybody does that. You don't want to do that." Is circumcision an extra charge?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's why they ask you to do it. How much more do they charge?
It depends.
Ballpark.
It can go anywhere in a newborn, anywhere, and I'm speaking nationally, from $100 to $1,500. Again, depending on the hospital, depending on the physician,
Plus the
depending
extra time in the hospital for the
Correct.
baby, correct?
Correct. And for the mother.
That's really
I can't believe
disgraceful.
you said. Most people don't think of that. That is such That's so
The
insightful.
extra time in the hospital is a real money maker for
it
hospitals now.
prolongs the hospital stay by somewhere between 6 and 24 hours, depending on when the
That's a big
circumciser
number
shows up. It
for,
certainly
for
is.
Mr. Hospital
Yes.
biller.
Yes. And a
I
big number
mean,
for our healthcare system. We should not be paying for
oh,
medically
that's
unnecessary.
amazing. I thought it was included, sort of, you know, like a cap on your coffee.
But you know what? Even if it's included, of course, the cost is still built in. But you have a hospital,
true.
you have the hospital costs, and you have the doctor costs.
Yes.
And we live in a fee-for-service medical system.
Plus, I guess the anesthesiologist.
There's no anesthesia.
Oh, that's right. That's what
There's
your
no
note said. My
anesthesia
apologies.
that can be safely administered. No general anesthesia can be safely administered to a newborn. And the analgesia, the anesthetics that are, we still believe about half circumcisions that are performed have no anesthetic. So the baby is completely fully aware and feels every bit of the pain. The anesthetics that are used when they are either topical, and the most common cream is called EMLA, and it's forbidden for use on the genitals of children in Europe. Or babies are given a sugar pacifier. And I say, you know, imagine going to a podiatrist to have an ingrown toenail removed and somebody gives you a Tootsie Roll Pop. It's not, it doesn't do anything to manage the pain.
I am so glad I had you on, because this is another black mark on the healthcare as it's practiced in this
industry,
country,
yes.
that they would charge for that. And so it's basically a
moneymaker.
Well, anyway, let's take a look at this slide, which shows the first one is the circumcision rates across the world.
Right.
Now, Canada, I wouldn't say that country was particularly uncivilized, would you? Or Australia?
Nor Australia, nor the United Kingdom.
Or the UK.
And the reason that we've given you this chart is we haven't even put in the European countries where circumcision is more like the UK, under 5%. That would be all of Scandinavia and essentially all of Western Europe and Eastern Europe, all of the non-Muslim world, essentially. So France, Germany, Italy. I like to say to people who are horrified by the idea of a natural penis, I like to show them a picture of the sexy Italian soccer team and tell them every man in this picture, you know, has all of his body parts. Do you think they're disgusting? So this shows, the interesting thing about this chart is that these are all countries that have the same circumcision history as the United States, which is that in Victorian England and America, in the mid-19th century, before the germ theory was proven, circumcision was first proposed by some doctors as a way of stopping boys from masturbating. The theory being masturbation dissipated the body and was a terrible practice. And so if you could inflict pain on a boy's genitals, he wouldn't touch himself. We know, of course, that's not true.
I never knew.
Right. Yeah,
Backgrounder
that's
there.
the history. Subsequently, circumcision was, because you have to justify, if you're going to do something that painful and that odd,
well,
you have to justify it.
Effects.
Right.
Now, the next slide shows, slide 2, please. There we go. U.S. circumcision. Look at that
rate.
humpback whale,
Right.
As and particularly peaking
In the 1960s, 1970s.
a mere 10 years ago.
Yeah,
peaking.
Yeah, more in the 60s and 70s, right. I was born, of course, in the early 50s when tonsillectomy was considered a routine, benign procedure. That's also, you know, plummeted since then. But yes, as you can see, and the interesting thing is if you look at the falling circumcision rate, you will find none of the purported poor or purported problems that are used to justify circumcision having increased. So circumcision is supposed to prevent urinary tract infections, people say that, or prevent other, you know, other infections. And of course, as the circumcision rate has declined, none of those things have come to pass, just as the countries that we saw before, Australia, the UK, Canada, that have very low circumcision rates, don't have higher rates of any of these dread diseases. So that's a very important thing that we need to remind people of.
Right. Let's take a look at the infection rates.
Okay, this is urinary tract infections. So circumcision is probably the most common health justification for circumcising babies is that it will reduce the number of urinary tract infections. This shows a lifetime rate of urinary tract infections, almost imperceptibly different. The rate
Statistically insignificant,
statistically
as we used
insignificant,
to say.
yeah. And if you see the rate of girls, if you compare circumcised boy infants to girl infants, girls have multiple times the rate of urinary tract infections, and we don't cut anything off of them. We just give them simple, cheap antibiotics, as we can do with our sons.
Yeah. Are there any instances where performing circumcision has gone wrong?
Oh, many.
How so?
We estimate, and it's been published in a peer-reviewed journal, that approximately 115 babies in the United States die each year as a consequence of circumcision.
115.
Yes. These deaths are not recorded as circumcision
Small, but
deaths.
that's still 115 unnecessary.
It's way more than die from bee stings and other things. It's small if you might say it's small if circumcision were was preventing some dread disease, but for a completely gratuitous, medically unnecessary surgery, even one death is too many. Nobody should die from an unnecessary surgery. And the deaths are attributed to hemorrhage, infection.
It's a very sensitive
But they're
spot.
hemorrhages and infections that would not have occurred
Filled
except
with
for the
blood
circumcision.
vessels. It is a super risky thing.
Yes.
I think. I mean,
And you don't have to die for it to have very negative consequences.
yeah. Now, negative consequences. We hear a lot about female circumcision in the news today. Not as much as we should, but we hear and we have heard all sorts of horror stories about what that does to female sexuality. Now, I was wondering if there are any studies that show what a circumcised male experiences as opposed to an intact male. Is there any such work?
Most of the work on sensitivity is out of Europe, where, of course, there are many more intact men.
More sensitive people.
There have been studies done in the U.S. There was a study on the sensitivity of where the large group of men were tested in California a number of years ago for tactile sensation on the different parts of the penis, the foreskin, the head of the penis, the shaft of the penis, and it's never been shown that men who've been circumcised have more sensitivity, except perhaps on their circumcision scar, which remains sensitive throughout life, or immediately after circumcision, where of course they're undergoing tremendous pain. The foreskin is a highly erogenous part of the male genitals. It has, as you said, blood vessels, muscles, and nerves, and you are amputating it. One thing that people don't realize when they talk about this as being a little tiny snip circumcision, anyone who's seen a circumcision knows it's not a snip. But the size of the amount of tissue removed in a circumcision of a baby in a male is approximately the size of a 3x5 index card.
Oh my
I should have brought that as a prop. So if you have a 3x5 index card, it's your hands, audience.
But that's in
and
a,
you fold
in
it
a,
over,
in a shaft.
and you that's the inner
in
and
a
outer
circle or something.
inner and outer foreskin, the entire circumference of the penis. So it's about 15 square inches. It's sort of like saying, well, a baby's heart is just a little tiny thing. Well, but in an adult, his heart's a big thing, and it's an essential part of his body.
Yeah. Wow.
So, yes, sir. So there are some studies. You asked the question. They are definitively, they definitively prove that the foreskin is an erogenous organ, as will any intact man tell you. Any intact man, if you ask him, will tell you how important his foreskin is. You asked about female genital cutting. Of course, it's illegal in the United States to even so much as inflict a pinprick on the genitals of a girl. And female genital cutting around the world varies tremendously in its invasiveness. Sometimes it literally is just to draw blood. But male circumcision is highly invasive. It removes, as I said, up to 15 square inches of tissue in an adult.
Yes, it doesn't necessarily make men impotent, but do they find it harder to arouse?
You know, sexuality research is
Or
complicated, and
last?
I'm not an expert on
Yeah.
it. Anecdotally, we know that men, as they approach middle age, men who've been circumcised and approach middle age, complain of dryness and lack of sensitivity. And that makes sense because you have removed the organ that protects the head of the penis. The foreskin comes down over the head of the penis and protects it from abrasion, from callousing. And if you look at photos,
And perhaps from callousing, that's an important point.
Yes.
Because that, speaking as a person who has one of those, that it's a very sensitive spot.
Right.
And if it gets calloused, you can't feel as much.
Feel as much, right.
Right.
Right. A colleague of mine who runs an organization in New York City has a T-shirt that he wears that says "Foreskin, feel more," and I think that men who are
T-shirts are the answer, I'm sure.
who talk
Right.
about this
Yes.
feel
Yes.
that that's true. You have a foreskin. How could you not feel more? Sort of, if you removed your fingertips, you would be able to function in life, but you wouldn't feel as much with your fingers, right?
No, certainly not. Now, there is big growth now in the number of parents opting to turn down the circumcision
Yes.
procedure.
Yes. You know, young parents all parents want to do the best for their children. Parents who've had their children circumcised have not done that because they've wanted to hurt their babies. They've done it because they've been convinced that somehow this is beneficial. Now, with so many men speaking out, and so many women speaking out their regrets for having gone with the flow and had their son circumcised. And with people doing research, the internet is a marvelous, marvelous opportunity for people to find out the truth. And
Isn't it, though?
Yeah, and Intact America's website and our Facebook
But also
page.
to tell lies, too.
Certainly,
Yeah, right.
certainly.
And, it's the greatest propaganda tool ever invented.
Yes, but you can,
it's
with
the greatest
assiduous
way for
research.
truth. Yes, right.
So Intact America has a website, intactamerica.org, and we have an incredibly interesting Facebook page with conversation flying, thousands of postings every day, and tremendous amount of information, opportunities to ask questions, not just of experts and people like me, but of colleagues.
IntactAmerica.org. And you're based in Tarrytown.
Yes, our office is in Tarrytown.
Are you a Westchester resident?
I actually live in Woodstock, New York,
I see.
after living in Nyack in Rockland County. But I ran for 25 years Hudson Health Plan, which was a very prominent managed care organization based in Westchester. So I've been, this is my stomping ground for many, many
Is there
years.
any movement toward creating a foreskin to those who don't have any? Medically, I mean, we see all sorts of miracles taking place with transplants. And anything in research?
Yeah, there are a couple things. One is there is a growing foreskin restoration movement, and if your audience wants to Google foreskin restoration, they will see many, many sites and products for essentially stretching the existing tissue and trying to attain some coverage. It's not the same as being left intact, but men who have restored their foreskins have found it to be, many men who've restored their foreskins have found it to be satisfying. There's also an effort to regenerate skin as there is to regenerate all kinds of body parts. That is still nascent, but I believe there will probably be some progress. There has been talk about transplants. Of course, you'd have to ask then, who wants to give up their foreskin in order to transplant it to somebody else? I've never heard of a cadaver foreskin transplant, but this is a very live conversation. I would say right now restoration is accessible to pretty much any American man who wanted to try it.
But the whole taboo area of using cadaver parts is intriguing. Because,
of course, would have to say in America you're not going to find too many foreskins that people are going to give up, because the adult population in the U.S., we estimate that between around 70 million men over the age of 18 have been deprived of their natural foreskins.
Now, no medical association recommends it.
That's correct. No medical association anywhere in the world has ever said that circumcision is medically necessary.
Why did they do it? It's for the money, I guess.
Well, that's one of the reasons. And then I do believe that...
I had been always told it was to prevent stuff getting underneath the foreskin and creating an infection.
Of course, that would be like pulling out your nails to keep the nail bed clean, right?
Yeah.
That hygiene is a big general kind of bucket that people throw that into. You know, we say, what other body part do you cut off to keep it clean?
Who's bathed more than a baby?
Right. Well, not just that, but men, grown men say, you know, that's the only part of my body that's really fun to wash. So, you know, we have...
Really?
Sorry.
It's
yeah,
okay.
I mean, you know, we raise our sons, we raise our children, and we consider that we want them to become, you know, astronauts, college professors, skilled craftsmen, doctors, lawyers, and we think somehow that they're not going to be able to wash their private parts. It makes no sense.
Certainly not. Now, we have about a minute to go, and your petition asks the American Academy of Pediatrics to do what?
Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2012 made a statement that circumcision is not medically necessary, but the advantages outweigh the risks. We believe that even a 15-year-old could read that paper and see the contradictions, because they then state that the risks have never been systematically studied. So then recently in January, the American Academy of Pediatrics, another committee, published a paper on infant pain and said that essentially it's intractable, that it's impossible to blunt the pain from medical procedures like heel sticks, intravenous insertions, and circumcision, and that the safer an anesthetic is, the less effective it is. So we say, if circumcision is not medically necessary and it's painful and you cannot control the pain, and they also stated that pain has long-term psychological and neurological impact, don't do it. So all we're saying, Intact America's petition, which you can find a link to on change.org, or you can find a link to on our website, intactamerica.org, says to the American Academy of Pediatrics, you've said it's not necessary, you've said it's painful, you've said the pain lasts a very long time, tell your doctors to stop.
Well, Georganne Chapin, Executive Director of Intact America, you have been heard. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your the opportunity
turning
to talk
back
to you.
the last frontier.
I hope we get there.
Good night.
Thank
for
you.
People
Thanks
here.
so much.